Knowledge is power, as Sir Francis Bacon once proclaimed. But what if this power came at a cost? Would you turn a blind eye in its pursuit? Would you compromise your fundamental values in its name? Would you put aside the ways in which it has been attained, no matter how grueling these might have been? Finally, would you go so far as to strike a deal with the devil, like Goethe's Faust, to obtain it?
While these questions may seem mystical and hypothetical, in 1945 some within the higher echelons of the United States of America had to find answers to them, and quickly at that. Of course, today we're talking about Operation Paperclip, the program which brought over 1,000 Nazi scientists to the United States after the war.
I'm Astrid Deinhard.
And I'm Anna Deinhard.
Hello, darlings.
A while back, we released the episode The Allied Hunt for Nazi Superweapons. In it, we detailed the Allied hunt for Nazi weapons and technologies up until March 1945. To avoid repeating ourselves, we will just briefly summarize the situations in the last months of the war. If you want to know more about the hunt, specifically for weapons and technologies rather than scientists, then check it out here.
Moving on. As the war approached its end in Europe, the Allies are scrambled to uncover any Nazi technologies and scientific innovations they could find. To facilitate this endeavor, following in the wake of the Allied eastward advance, a potpourri of different agencies and task forces descended upon the Reich.
Some of the most important of these seekers of knowledge were Alsos, looking for chemical and biological weapons, Special Missions V2, looking for, well, the V2. Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, looking for all kinds of stuff, and so on. At one point, as many as 32 distinct agencies, organizations, and task forces showed up at one crash site in the pursuit of knowledge.
During this time, Alsos managed to get their hands on Rosenberg's list, essentially a who is who of all Nazi scientists. This made it easy for Allied investigators to know who they were looking for, but it also posed the question of what to do once they had found the scientists.
Whichever approach would be chosen, first they needed to be found.
Using the addresses on Rosenberg's list, the Allies were able to locate some of the scientists residing in Germany, such as Rosenberg himself. Others willingly gave themselves up, as was the case with Wernher von Braun, the chief architect of the Vergeltungswaffe 2, the V2, the first ever liquid propellant short-range rocket. With it, the Nazis had brought fear and despair to the UK, Belgium, France, and the Netherlands.
While there is ample debate about whether the V2 was a waste of resources in terms of winning the war and to which degree it affected Allied morale, one thing is undebatable. It was by far the most advanced rocket in the world. Nazi rocketry at the time was years, if not decades, ahead of the rest of the world.
It is no surprise, then, that von Braun gave himself up and thought he could make a deal with someone. By May 1945, he, General Dornberger, the military commander of the V2 programs, and hundreds of other V2 scientists are enjoying springtime in the Bavarian Alps at the Ingeborg ski resort.
Weeks prior, they had fled from the last V2 site in Nordhausen. There, the V1 and V2 had been constructed in subterranean factories by thousands of slaves from the concentration camp Mittelbau-Dora.
Some of the GIs, however, do not appreciate the way von Braun carries himself once captured. Rather than a humbled enemy combatant, he posed for endless pictures with individual GIs, in which he beamed, shook hands, pointed inquiringly at medals, and otherwise conducted himself as a celebrity rather than a prisoner, treating our soldiers with the affable condescension of a visiting congressman.
Maybe von Braun acts the way he does because he has an ace up his sleeve, a hidden stash of research notes and blueprints entombed at Dernten Mine in the close vicinity of Nordhausen. Other scientists are not found at their homes like Osenberg, or give themselves up like von Braun, but try to hide.
One such individual is Georg Ricci, former general manager of Mittelwerk, the subterranean slave factory at Nordhausen. After abandoning the Mittelwerk, sometimes around early April 45, he had taken a job in a salt mine 90 miles away from Nordhausen. It's not too hard to imagine why he would like to escape the Allies, given that he had worked many thousands of slaves to their death.
Eventually, however, sometime in the middle of May, Colonel Peter Beasley of the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, USSBS, finds him. He is tasked with finding the engineers who had built the underground bunkers of the Reich, which withstood Allied bombing raid after bombing raid. While he is not actually looking for Ricky, he chances upon him, questions him, learns about his expertise, and eventually tells him.
You have lost the war, and so, as far as I'm concerned, you are a man who knows a lot about rockets, right? As an American officer, I want my country to have full possession of all your knowledge. To my superiors, I shall recommend that you be taken to the United States.
It's one of the first offers made to German scientists to come to America. But by then, 5 German scientists are already at work in the USA.
Dr. Herbert Wagner and 4 of his assistants are already stateside by May 18th, 1945, barely more than a week after the end of the war. That was fast. This Austrian aeronautic specialist is an expert on guided missiles and bombs. His creation, the Henschel HS-293, had proved a very capable ship killer during the war.
But why was he rushed to the States? Well, the Navy states that Wagner is a man with knowledge, experience, and skills unmatched anywhere in the world. And while the war is over in Europe, it still rages in the Pacific. And the Navy believes that Wagner and his knowledge can be instrumental in defeating the Japanese.
This presents the first of the initial motivation behind bringing Nazi scientists to the USA: the fight against Japan. At this point, without knowledge of any superweapon to end the war, the US commanders fear that the war could drag on into 1946, possibly even 47, and that the Japanese home island will need to be invaded.
Given this prospect, gathering any scientific knowledge that can shorten these estimates is welcome. The Navy is so rushed to get Wagner to begin his research that the Director of Naval Intelligence lobbies the War Department to circumnavigate the State Department in the matter. Technically, this makes Dr. Wagner an illegal alien.
For now, this remains the only such initiative, and it does not come from the top, but the Navy's own brainchild. Yet, it isn't long before the higher-ups at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force chef, including Eisenhower, want clear instructions on how to proceed with the German scientists.
As May comes to an end, the US Army has hundreds of scientists detained in various camps, in Bavaria, in Heidenheim, in Zell am See, in Austria, and so on. So Eisenhower cables the White House.
Restraint and control of future German scientific and technical investigations are clearly indicated. But this headquarters is without guidance on the matter and is in no position to formulate long-term policy. The restraint here serves to outline another motivation for the US wanting to control German scientists. Sure, their knowledge and the war against Japan are two strong arguments.
But another is the sheer amount of death and despair the German war machine has brought to the world. And behind each machine had sat one or multiple German scientists. Given this never-before-seen destruction, something has to be done to ensure that Germany can't do so again. As Army Air Forces Lieutenant Colonel John O'Mara states,
Germany was to be disarmed, demilitarized, and denazified, so its ability to make war would be reduced to nil. And science and technology were at the very heart of the matter. Clearly, German science must be curbed. Moreover, there is also an explicit reason why the US is doing this solo.
Okay, so in theory, all information on, for instance, the WE weapons is to be shared between the US and the UK per a previous agreement. But this agreement has now effectively become nothing but empty promises. Not to mention that preventing the Russians from getting the information is also a key objective.
Thus, in late May 1945, controlling the scientists is not only about gaining knowledge or an advantage against Japan, but also about curbing Germany's future scientific capability for destruction and ensuring the USA's competitive advantage over its allies, British or Soviet.
For now, Eisenhower's plea for direction go unheard in a chaos and tumult besetting the US administrators, military officers, logisticians, and so on in the days and weeks after victory in Europe. Here, US Army is being transformed from a military force into an occupying force, and that takes time and resources.
Roughly 2 months after Eisenhower had asked the clear instructions, he gets them. While the informal policy of detaining German scientists had been in practice in Washington, the cogs of the machine have been turning in the State War-Navy Coordination Committee, the predecessors to today's National Security Council.
It was created in 1944 to manage and oversee any issues stemming from the occupation of Axis powers after the end of the war. It is composed of 3 members: the State Department, the War Department, and the Navy.
As you might imagine, not everyone is happy with the idea of inviting former Nazi scientists to the US. The State Department is most vocal in its opposition to the program. What will the world or the American people think when it becomes public that the US has invited German scientists to its shores, while at the same time criticizing Argentina because it aids Nazi fugitives? This is a scandal waiting to happen.
Hey, we also just published a video about red lines, which explains the whole Nazi-Argentina dynamic and why so many Nazis were able to flee from the clutches of justice. Check it out if you want to know more.
Okay. Anyway, some people have no such moral qualms. It is a mere trade-off, one which could expand America's military superiority while at the same time leading to economic growth. This elusive term, economic growth, is another driver behind the coming Operation Paperclip.
In 1943, President Roosevelt had promised Americans 6 million jobs. Henry Wallace, head of the Department of Commerce, thinks that German scientists can help that happen. He believes that it is wise and logical to bring to America scientists of outstanding attainments who can make a positive contribution to our scientific and industrial efforts.
Given this and the other motives we discussed before, eventually on July 6, 1945, the Joint Chiefs of Staff finally approve a Nazi scientist program on paper. It goes into effect on July the 20th. The subject line reads, exploitation of German specialists in science and technology in the United States, with further instruction that only the most compelling argument should bring a German specialist to this country.
Additionally, one of the ground rules for bringing them over is that it will be temporary, and at the return of their exploitation, they will be sent back to Germany.
The project also has an official codename, Operation Overcast. The name Paperclip will not emerge until later, and we will explain why when we get there. For now, the governing body of this new initiative is the Military Intelligence Division of the War Department G2. It is also important to note that President Truman is unaware of this program at this time.
Now Operation Overcast had begun in earnest. The first scientists other than Wagner arrive in the USA on September 20, 1945. Amongst them are von Braun and his clique. Around the same time, the first changes to the barely 3-month-old program are made. It is taken away from the War Department and put under the direct control of the Chiefs of Staff.
In turn, they create the Joint Intelligence Objective Agency,
JIOA,
in charge of overseeing the quickly expanding secret operation. Things are going to get a bit complicated for a second here, but bear with us.
The Chiefs of Staff are in charge. The Joint Intelligence Committee, JIC, in short, answers them and provides intel from the various intelligence agencies.
The JIOA, the organization responsible for Paperclip, is a subcommittee of the JIC and has 4 members. The Army's Director of the Intelligence, the Chief of Naval Intelligence, the Assistant Chief of Air Staff 2, Air Force Intelligence, and a representative from the State Department.
Okay, complicated time over. With the JIOA now in charge of the military side of the operation, the Navy, Army, and Air Force all want to proceed. The only pushback comes from the State Department.
Its strong resistance is due to the fact that few, if any, German scientists has no blood on their hands. For the moment, at least, in theory, no known or alleged war criminals and no ardent Nazis are allowed to enter the program.
Something already not true in practice. Von Braun had been a member of the SS since at least 1940, being SS Sturmbannführer since 1944. Yet, perhaps more compromising, he has been in charge of research and manufacturing involving many thousands of forced laborers and slaves in multiple concentration camps.
Things will continue this underhand way until 1946, but then Overcast finds itself in a perfect storm. George Kennan, Deputy Chief of the U.S. diplomatic mission in Moscow, sends a message that will become known as the Long Telegram from Moscow to Washington on February 22nd, 1946. Here he warns that the conflict between the USA and the Soviet Union will be an unavoidable and long-lasting strife of ideology. While the JIOA has already established the Soviet Union as a significant threat, Kennan's argument adds flesh and blood to such fears.
Moreover, around the same time, letters received by one of the German scientists in the US raise some eyebrows. Albert Patin has been informed by former members of his staff who remain in Germany that the French and Russians are making attractive offers to them. A memo from the JIC to the Joint Chiefs from that time reads,
Unless the migration of important German scientists and technicians into the Soviet zone is stopped, we believe that the Soviet Union within a relatively short time may equal United States developments in the field of atomic research and guided missiles, and may be ahead of US developments in other fields of great military importance, including infrared, television, and jet propulsion.
To prevent this, the JIOA makes 3 crucial changes to Overcast. First, it is decided that it is paramount to ensure that no more German scientists go to work for the Soviets. Second, to ensure, 1, the US should provide German scientists and their families with anything they desire, including visas. And third, a list should be drawn up of the most essential 1,000 German scientists who shall subsequently be brought to the USA.
Another fundamental shift is the language and selection criteria. No known or alleged war criminals and no ardent Nazis becomes no persons who might try and plan for the resurgence of German military potential. Essentially now, the only thing that matters is whether any one scientist is of interest to the Soviets. In other words, Overcast has shifted firmly into the beginnings of the Cold War, and getting one up on the Russians matters more than anything else.
It follows that the program is no longer a temporary employment situation for Nazi scientists, but a long-term project, even with the readiness to make some of these war criminals American citizens. On March 4th, 1946, SWNCC paper number 275/5 goes into effect. German scientists can now be admitted to the United States in a classified program that is in the national interest.
But the State Department still refuses to play ball. Multiple actions are taken to stamp out this resistance. For one, Robert Patterson, Secretary of War, sends out a memorandum stating the War Department should do everything possible to clear away obstacles that may be raised in this State Department. While this takes some wind out of the sails of the State Department, resistance does not collapse. Another problem altogether is individuals who are, how should I put this? Well, known to be documented Nazi scum. Well, there you have it.
The State Department just flat out denies any such applications, even after the changes of language. Thus, when Army intelligence officers review the files of such individuals, they discreetly attach a paperclip. See what we did there? These files are held back to be given to the State Department of a later date. For now, the scientists in question will just have to remain under military custody a while longer.
And yes, you guessed right. This is where the name Operation Paperclip comes from. You see, the original name Operation Overcast has to be dropped because some German scientists and their families begin publicly referring to their housing in the US as a Camp Overcast. Not idea for a secret program, right?
Not really. But what is truly needed to force the State Department into line is the AOK from one man, President Truman. And on September 3rd, 1946, that's what the president gives. The 1,000 scientists from the list are to be brought to the US and, more importantly, they are allowed to immigrate. The path has been cleared for war criminal visas.
Even with the State Department sidelined, resistance does not take long to reemerge. By October 1946, there are now 233 paperclip scientists in the United States in military custody, and everything is going smoothly. But 2 weeks later, the New York Times publishes an article detailing that the US is secretly getting Nazi scientists to the States.
Its sources were the Russian Army Berlin-based newspaper Tägliche Rundschau and the Russian-licensed East German newspaper Berliner Zeitung. The War Department, in a bid to muddy the waters, decide to go public with an official version of events. They take the most harmless scientists and make them available for interviews and radio broadcasts, like Hugo Eckener, an 80-year-old Zeppelin expert, now working with Goodyear on a new blimp design.
But it does not take long for public outrage to erupt. Journalist and foreign affairs correspondent Joachim Jösten is outraged by the very idea of Paperclip, writing in The Nation, "If you enjoy mass murder, but also treasure your skin, be a scientist, son. It's the only way nowadays of getting away with murder."
Moreover, the Federation of American Scientists, FAS, meets in New York City to ask President Truman to put an end to it. Along the same lines, former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt also publicly opposes the idea.
Albert Einstein even goes so far as to write a personal letter to President Truman stating, "We hold these individuals to be potentially dangerous. Their former eminence as Nazi Party members and supporters raises the issue of their fitness to become American citizens and hold key positions in American industrial, scientific, and educational institutions."
All this leads the War Department to prohibit any further release of information about the program in early 1947. For the moment, Paperclip, even the sanitized official version, is on a knife's edge. Will the president be forced to shut down the program, or will the operation manage to slip out of the limelight and retreat back into the shadows?
These are some of the questions we will answer in the next episode of this 2-episode Paperclip special.
We also quickly want to bring your attention to Annie Jacobsen and her book Operation Paperclip, the most recent and most complete account out there. If you want to know more details about Paperclip, check out her book.
Right. If you'd like to know more about espionage operations related to the Second World War, then check out our other Spies and Ties videos. To learn more about the Nazi flight to Argentina, check out the Red Lines video. Or if you want to know more about the build-up to Paperclip, check out our video, The Allied Hunt for Superweapons.
Links should be somewhere around our heads right now.
To get ever more content like this, please join the Time Ghost Army at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. And we will see you soon in the future, darlings.